Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we are going to start Unit 11, Civil Disobedience and Satyagraha. Let us first have introduction about the unit. The concept of civil disobedience movement has become an important element in the political power structure in contemporary world. This movement has spread around the world. It has been exemplified by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the civil rights movement in the United States, the People's Powers movement in the Philippines, the non-violent collapse of communalism in Eastern Europe, and so on. The success of Gandhi and Doctor Martin Luther King Jr. had a lot to do with the emergence of Satyagraha as an organizational power. To discuss about the history of the 20th century without exploring the impact of civil disobedience and Satyagraha is to malign the very basic of the people's movement and the study of the social science. The Gandhian method of civil disobedience and satyagraha has given a new dimension to the concept of statecraft. While delivering the most prestigious Gandhi Memorial Lecture on Towards a World Without War, Gandhism and the Modern World on 11th February 1992, Dr. Dekashu Ikadu said, "As we approach the end of this century of the unprecedented war and violence, we seek as our common goal the creation of a world without war. At this critical juncture, what can we must we learn from this great philosopher, a man whose spiritual legacy could rightly be termed as one of humanity's priceless treasures, a miracle of the 20th century. The basic aim of every political system is to assist in the process of self-actualization of individuals to fulfill the inner requirement for a continuous moral growth. The very concept of Satyagraha has provided a new meaning and orientation to the concept of politics. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was so much influenced by the concept of civil disobedience and Satyagraha that he said, if humanity is to progress, Gandhi is inescapable. He lived, thought, and acted inspired by the vision of humanity evolving towards a world of peace and harmony. The Swedish economist Gunnar Myrdal said, in a time of deepening crisis in the underdeveloped world, of social militancy in the affluent societies, it seems likely that Gandhi's ideas and techniques will become increasingly relevant. In a violent international climate, with struggle for economic hegemonism and ever escalating systematic process of violence, not to mention about the human rights violations, poverty and hunger, the concept of civil disobedience and satyagraha of Gandhi is gaining more and more momentum. The concept of civil disobedience and Satyagraha has played an important role in the theory and practice of human liberation movements. It has indeed continued to inspire the social and political movements throughout the world. The Gandhian principles of non-violence and civil disobedience are rooted in his concept of Satyagraha. The anti-nuclear and green movements, the termination of static communist administration in the Czechoslovakia in 1987, and the popular resistance movement in Kosovo against the Siberian ethnic persecutions are some of the important civil disobedience movements of the last century. The rise of racial and ethnic chauvinism and retrogressive character of the globalization process has again highlighted the role of civil disobedience and satyagraha as a strategy of social and political movements. Now let us move to the next point, concept of civil disobedience. The phrase civil disobedience, which is so widely used as a strategy to ensure social justice throughout the world, does not have any precise and specific connotation. Henry David Thoreau is generally credited with using this phrase as the title of an essay in 1849. Thoreau changed the title of his essay from Resistance to Civil Government to Civil Disobedience. There is, however, neither any document evidence to show that the Thoreau himself coined this phrase, nor any reason given by him to indicate as to why he changed the title of his essay. The concept of civil disobedience has a long and varied history, covering almost the whole stream of human thought from the Greek era to the present day. The justification and analysis of the concept has been attempted from a variety of philosophical, political, and linguistic angles. The concept of civil disobedience implies an act or process of public defense of a lay law and policy duly formulated and created by a governmental authority, which an individual or a group of considers to be unjust and or unconstitutional. The defense of the governmental law or policies must be a premeditated act, and the movement has to be announced in advance. The defense of law might take either violent or non-violent form. It may be either active or passive. As the basic spirit of the civil disobedience movement is to arouse public conscience, the individual or the group must be prepared to accept punishment for the violation of law and policies. The action or non-action of civil disobedience has to be openly insisted on in order to be qualified as civil disobedience. The mere non-compliance of legal provisions does not itself constitute civil disobedience. The concept of civil disobedience is grounded in justice and common goal, and its end must be a limited one. The basic aim of civil disobedience movement is to arouse consciousness in the adversities and appeal to their conscience. Although the methodology of civil disobedience is not restricted within the limited framework of either violent acts or non-violent actions, for a variety of historical or philosophical reasons, most of the practitioners of the civil rights movement are committed to non-violence. Some of the pacifist believers of civil disobedience even assume that a complete commitment to non-violence is ethically superior to the possible use of violence. In contemporary literature, the concept of civil disobedience has been understood as a political strategy adopted by Mahatma Gandhi and his followers in India to oppose British colonial administration. Martin Luther King Jr., during the civil rights movement in the United States, also successfully used this strategy. Referring to the concept of civil disobedience, Mahatma Gandhi said, I shall consider it to be a public, non-violent and conscientious act contrary to law, usually done with the intent to bring about a change in the policies or laws of the government. Civil disobedience is a political act in the sense that it is an act justified by moral principles, which define a conception of civil society and the public good. It rests then on political convictions as opposed to the search for self or group interest. In the case of a constitutional democracy, we may assume that this conviction involves the conception of the justice that involves around the Constitution itself. Now let us move to the next point, that is history of the concept of civil disobedience. The concept of civil disobedience has a long and varied history. The concept was very popular as the Antigone theme in the Greek dramas. It was the basic theme of the anti-war motif of Lysistrata, where the women, apart from leaving their men, captured the Acropolis and treasury of Athens. This conflict between civil law and the conscience could be seen in the passive resistance of Jews to the introduction of icons into Jerusalem. Throughout the long history of human civilization, there has always been a conflict between individual freedom and political authorities of the state. The freedom to choose whether to obey the dictates of state law or not has always been the basic theme of the civil disobedience movement. Socrates considered obedience to and search for truth as the fundamental aim of human life. To him, justice is an element of truth, although he strongly believed that an individual could only develop in a well ordered society, and it was his moral duty to obey the state. He was not prepared to sacrifice the realms of conscience. He strongly advocated that the state has no right to force an individual to act unjustly. This is the area in which he justified the role of civil disobedience. The early Christians used civil disobedience movement as justification for religious and moral obedience to God. This was the first non-violent civil disobedience movement in the West. The doctrine of civil disobedience movement has been used as an instrument of socio-political transformation on a number of occasions. The modern concept of civil disobedience has its origin in the writings of the imperialists like Thomas Hobbes. The political situation of England in the 17th century made Hobbes espouse the doctrine of fundamental natural rights as a basis for obedience to government. He was convinced that in order to guarantee rights to the individuals, the state must ensure a climate of civil peace. He was not prepared to grant the right to dissent to the individuals in the state. The only condition under which the individuals were entitled to have the right to dissent was when the state was not strong enough to protect the rights of the individual and to ensure civil peace in society. The right to civil disobedience was indeed inherent in the specific conditionality of Hobbes. John Locke was of the opinion that the people have a right to resume their original liberty and to establish a new government. Even if he was not so precise and clear about the propriety of resistance to the authorities of the state, he was convinced that the people have the right to have both non-violent and violent civil disobedience movement to ensure liberties, properties, and social justice. While analyzing the empirical utilitarian approach to determine the concept of the right to resist, Henry David Thoreau adopted an idealistic anarchist view. He strongly believed that all civil laws that try to encroach upon the area of moral law have no moral justification to exist. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, which emphasized humanitarian foundations for men's basic rights, supports the contention of theories. In his Treatise of Human Nature, David Hume provided a libertarian concept of civil disobedience. Jeremy Bentham advocated that the conscious citizen have to enter into measures of resistance as a matter of duty as well as interest. James Mill adopted a paradoxical attitude towards the concept of civil disobedience. He supported the right to a violent revolution while opposing the right to advocate limited civil disobedience. All the empiricists like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, David Hume, Jeremy Bentham, and James Mill were in favor of a negative concept of individual freedom. They put emphasis on the absence of restraints as the basic requirement of individual freedom. Their views against all improper use of governmental authority provided the basic ground for the modern theories of civil disobedience. The idealistic school was less hospitable to the concept of civil disobedience. From Aristotle to Rousseau and supporters of Hegelian as well as Marxist traditions all have emphasized the importance of the state over individuals. While emphasizing the positive concept of freedom, the idealists were of the opinion that the positive concept of freedom could only be achieved by an unconditional loyalty to a collectivity. The syndicalist imperialists the obedience to democratic trade union leadership only so as to have access to the areas of positive freedom. One must not forget that the anarchist in the idealist or socialist tradition have always pleaded for a total rejection of state system based on the positive concept of freedom. In fact, they provided a new approach to the realization of man's social self through civil disobedience. Political theorists consider the idea of natural law as an important basis of the modern idea of civil disobedience. Although both Aristotle and Cicero failed to develop a theory of civil disobedience, their views on the subject have definitely paved the way for the justification of a civil disobedience movement. Aristotle said that unjust law is not a law. Cicero was of the view that a true law, namely right reason, which is in accordance with the nature, applies to all men and is unchangeable and eternal. These views has provided a strong ground for the civil disobedience movement. Thomas Aquinas considered unjust law as acts of violence rather than laws. To him, such laws do not bind in conscience. However, he would not allow any disobedience to the church at all and disobedience to the state only in rare cases. Modern neo-Thomists have adopted the same cautious attitude of Aquinas regarding the issue of civil disobedience. Pope Pius XII was criticized for not adopting a bold stand against the genocide of European Jews. Rolf Huchert, in his play The Deputy, criticized the Pope for not doing enough to disobey or resist Hitler's aggression. In recent years, the Church has taken a bold stand regarding civil disobedience. The right to disobedience is no more limited to violation of divine laws. Pope John said, for to safeguard the inviolable rights of the human person and to facilitate the fulfillment of his duties should be the essential office of every public authority. This means that if any government does not acknowledge the right of man or violates them, it not only fails in its duty, but its orders completely lack judicial force. Here we want to wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.